Welcome to Amplify Women in Research. I'm very excited today to have Dr. Nicole Keith with us. Dr. Keith is a professor in kinesiology and dean of faculty affairs at Indiana University, and most recently took on the position of president of the American College of Sports Medicine. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
It's always fun to hear about how people got started in the field. So can you tell us a little bit about your start, and if there was anyone or anything in particular that drew you into sport and exercise science?
Sure. So probably very young. My parents grew up pretty poor in Chicago and managed through education and resources to move to Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I spent most of my childhood. And we would go back and visit their brothers and sisters in Chicago. And I was really, as I grew up, kind of struck by how much different my family members in Chicago were compared to my parents and my brother and me. And I started realizing that healthy living was the reason why. They ate things that we didn't eat. We did things in terms of physical activity that they didn't do. And it was because of education and resources. And so pretty early on, I realized that physical activity and healthy eating would help you age more slowly and live a more healthy life. So I started to pursue a degree in physical education. I was going to be a physical education teacher. That's what I knew exercise people did. And I did that, and when it came time for me to do my student teaching in college, I realized I can't be a physical education teacher. I didn't like it. You know, not everybody loves physical activity the way I do, and it was really hard for me to convince kids that this was good for you, and kids aren't thinking long-term about chronic disease. They're thinking about tomorrow or tonight. So I didn't enjoy it, excuse me, and so I happened to be a student of a woman who was the president of the American Alliance of Health, American Alliance of Health, Education, Recreation, and Dance, or AFERD. It's Shape America now. And I was talking to her about this, and she's all about physical education. She's on the United States Olympic Committee. She's a pretty powerful woman. And she said, you know, you could pursue a degree in exercise science. You don't have to be a physical educator. And I was like, exercise science, what's that? So she told me, and she was able to help me get a graduate assistantship at the University of Rhode Island in cardiac rehab. And I did that for 2 years, and I really loved the cardiac rehab participants, and I really loved learning about exercise scientifically, how it can reduce aging or delay aging and improve chronic disease outcomes. But I did not like sitting in the cardiac rehab clinic watching the telemetry for 8 hours a day. Participants were great, telemetry not so much. But one of the professors there was doing bench research, and I found it really fascinating. And he was looking at muscle atrophy and in rat models. And I thought it was really interesting, and so I started helping him with that. And I started going to American College of Sports Medicine meetings, and I met a professor there, and he was applying for a grant with the Department of Defense between Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield. They wanted to send women out into combat or at the front lines, and they wanted to stop their periods because it can be a nuisance when you're in the middle of the desert. So, but they wanted to know if putting them on a certain form of birth control called Depo-Provera, which is injectable birth control that lasts for several months and stops your period, if that would affect their ability to train and to heat acclimatize. And so they were going to do this research study to investigate this question, but there were no women in the lab. And it's really hard to have that research study with no women, and I don't think there's any way the DoD would give a grant to a lab with no women, that grant. So they brought me in, and I really did manage the participants, who were, 18 to 22-year-old women who were not fit, who basically had to go through boot camp over a period of 6 months. And these women came in and they didn't exercise, or they weren't regular exercisers, and they trained, and I had to keep them in the study 6 days a week. They were training either in our heat chamber or outside. And I really saw what this intervention was, what I would call it, even though that's not what it was. We were really drawing blood and looking at ovulation and looking at heat acclimatization, but they were also becoming very fit. And it was changing them. They were doing better in their classes, they were doing better in their friendships and in their relationships, and they were more confident, and they were healthier, and they just looked different. And it wasn't just their physique, it was everything about them. And I was like, wow, look at what physical activity can do for these women. And I decided I didn't want to be a bench scientist anymore. I wanted to do that. I wanted to find people who weren't exercising and identify ways for them to exercise, because it can make them so much healthier, physically and mentally. And so that was it. That's why I do this work.
It's amazing when you run those interventions with people who have not been previously active. And, we're collecting our physiological data and questionnaires, but you see some change in these people that you can't quite quantify for a paper. Like it's amazing, right? And that's what kind of keeps you coming back and think, I've got to keep doing this. There's something here. We're not measuring it right, but there's something here, and it's really important that we get people to be active.
Definitely.
That's a great story. I love that you sort of, went back and forth and changed your mind a bit, because I think students these days are very stressed about getting it right out of the gate. And you kind of have to learn by trying different things. And I think, I'm sure you feel this way, that all of those experiences that you had contributed to what you're doing with your career now, right?
They were absolutely valuable. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So it's funny, one of the questions I sent you was, what's your most cited paper? And you're not the first one to respond by saying, I don't know, which I love. I think this is a great trend that we're uncovering here. But what is your most cited paper? And when you looked it up, is it the one that you expected to be the most cited?
I still haven't looked it up, because not only do I not know, I don't care, but, but what I will say, because I was reviewing your questions last night, and I was like, I'm not looking it up. I don't care. And I don't want to start that trend of where am I cited the most or the least, because I know what papers are most meaningful to me. And, these papers get published and everybody reads them or nobody reads them. And it's like, what was most meaningful to me? And I have two. One is most meaningful because so many students contact me about it. I developed a self-reported fitness survey, and I've actually published 3 papers from that survey development. And students want to use it, some professionals, but mostly students want to use this self-reported fitness survey because it's so hard to assess physical fitness in the field. And I've really met some amazing students who are doing undergraduate or graduate research and want to use the survey. And it's really rewarding that I created something that people want to use. The other one, the other paper is it's called Social Forces and something else, but it's comparing Black and white women and in weight loss, and what motivates a Black woman compared to what motivates a white woman. And it's a qualitative paper. So I went around and interviewed women who were referred to a weight management clinic in our healthcare system, to find out, and women who were referred but didn't go. And I wanted to learn, we've got this great weight management program. If people enroll and they go even twice a month, they lose weight. And so I wanted to find out why people didn't go or went and stopped going. And so I went to these women's homes and interviewed them, and started noticing, and so the paper was not in my head when I started these interviews. I was really just trying to learn how we could make our weight management clinic better. And then I started noticing not only were these women saying very different things, but their environments, like their micro environments, were very different. Like I would walk into houses and it was striking how different the home of these obese white women were compared to these obese Black women, and how they viewed weight was so different. I was like, there's something here. And I really wanted to start taking inventory of their house without telling them. So I, wrote my IRB protocol to get permission to do that. And then wrote a paper about it. And when I was writing it, it felt like a reflection. But then I submitted it, and the reviewers were really struck by the paper. And normally, reviewers are kind of critical and um, really helpful in making your paper better for sure. But I'd never had a review where they were like, wow, this is amazing. And, oh, this is really terrible if people really feel this way about weight loss. And they were really reflecting too on, this is the work I do, and I never knew this. And so I didn't go back and see if it was cited at all or how many times. But that review, I felt like I was having a conversation with the reviewers instead of just answering somebody who was critical. And it was a really a wonderful experience for me writing that paper.
That's fantastic. And it's so nice when, you're so involved in the research that you start observing things and then you create new novel contributions, right? Just by being so engaged with the work. And I love that you didn't look up your citations, because I think this is part of the problem in academia right now is we've become a bit numbers obsessed. What's my H index? What are my citations? And I feel like it's really ruining research to some extent, right? Like it's dictating what type of research people do, as opposed to what you're saying, doing things that are meaningful. So hopefully we'll have a little bit of a switch back at some point, because I think those contributions like you're talking about are much more meaningful to the participants and potentially to the way programs are run, whereas citations are just for academics, right?
Right. And as an Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs, we have been having the conversation for many years about what counts. Because I know that people who are assistant professors and want to move to associate, or associate and want to achieve full, numbers matter, but what counts? And so if I'm doing community-based participatory research, which is what I do, it takes a really long time to develop relationships with the community. And so I've got papers that were 13, 14, 15 years because I had to build trust first before I could start doing research with the community. And so, and my university really values community relationships. So they ask faculty to come in and develop these community relationships, but the actual relationship at a time didn't count. It actually does now. We figured it out. But it's also really asking universities to take a look at what counts. And for me, we realized in my third year review, I was going to have this parallel research agenda, one that could quickly produce papers and the other one that could develop relationships. And that's what we did. And it worked. But fortunately now, people don't have to have parallel research agendas. You can just have one and be successful at my university.
That's awesome. And it's true, because there's a real conversation happening right now about the contributions of universities in society. And I think the type of community work that, someone like you is doing is what's being highlighted right now, right? Like that's the contribution. It's not just in-person classes. We do a whole lot more for the community as well. And so it's nice to see that being given more importance, because I often argue that it's actually more meaningful and impactful sometimes than a paper that's been cited 50 times or 100 times, right? Because you're actually impacting people's lives.
And it's rewarding because you can see them.
You can see them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, like for long-term career sustainability, you have to find something that brings you joy, right? And so if that's the programming that brings you joy, then that's what you should do, right? You'll be able to be much more productive in that program.
Right. That's exactly right.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit here. You're currently the president for ACSM. What made you decide to take on a pretty significant service role like that? And I didn't realize that you're also dean of faculty affairs. So those are two pretty significant service commitments. What were some of the sort of what was the decision-making process there? And can you tell us a little bit about some of the pros and cons that you have to balance out to make the decision?
Yeah, so it's really an honor to serve as president of the American College of Sports Medicine. You know, we have 50,000 members and certified professionals, and there are a lot of people whose career pinnacle is this position. And I've got a lot of career left. So even in the beginning, so in order to be ACSM president, you first have to be a trustee, and then you have to be a vice president, at least a vice presidential candidate. And then you can be nominated to be president. And and in order to be a trustee, you have to be a fellow. And I had just achieved fellowship when I was asked to run for the Board of Trustees. And I hadn't even gone to the new fellows reception to get my certificate to say you're a fellow. And so I was really thrilled when I achieved fellowship. But when I was asked to run, I thought I'm pretty junior, and I was like becoming an associate professor. But again, it was like the timing. I hadn't even yet become an associate professor. So I'm an assistant professor, I've just achieved fellowship, and you want me to run for the Board of Trustees. I don't know that I'm ready to do that. And Larry Durstein was the one of the members of the executive committee. So I don't know if he was president-elect, president, or past president, but he was on the executive committee. And he said the nominating committee wouldn't have selected you to run had they thought you were not ready. And I was like, okay, that's very wise. Okay, I'll run. And I ran and I won. And it's a 3-year term, so I was on the board for 3 years, and I really felt like I made great contributions, and I did a lot of good work while I was on the board. And after that, maybe 2 years after my time ended, I was asked to run for vice president. And I was like, wow, that's a big deal. And what does that involve? And the president at the time told me, oh, it's not a lot. And she kind of said, it's a transition. You serve on some committees, and they're important committees, but it's really just a transition between the trustees and the president's position. So you help. And I was like, okay. And so I agreed to run, and then I saw who I was running against, and I was like, oh, there's no way I'm going to win, but I did. And I was really, really honored that people voted for me. And there are 2 vice presidents, actually there are 4, and 2 are elected each year. And it's a 2-year term. And we did a lot of really good work, but it wasn't like a couple committees. It was actually, I was assigned to 27 committees. And
Wow.
I thought that's, how do you do that even? So we made this structure so that we spread the wealth among the trustees and the vice presidents, because trustees didn't get assigned any committees. And yet I have 27. That doesn't make any sense. So we actually worked to revise the organizational structure. And it's one of the things of which I'm most proud, that an ACSM member who isn't on the board wouldn't see, that every board member, and there's about 50 of us, are assigned committees so that every committee has a board liaison now. Because before, it's impossible to manage 27 committees and know what's going on. So right after I was vice president, I was asked to run for president, and I agreed to do that, and I lost. And I lost to the other vice president, Walt Thompson, and we had become really good friends over the years. We did a lot of great work together. We got to know each other's spouses. I mean, we were friends, and so it's hard to lose, but he's a good man, and he won. And so I said, okay, I need to start focusing on my career again. And so I got a R01, And I got promoted to full professor, and I got appointed to be associate dean, and I continued to volunteer for ACSM. My office is about 7 minutes walking from the National Center. So it's literally across the street from our campus. And so if ACSM asked me to do something locally, I would, because I was there and I was still a fellow. And Walt then was on the nominating committee and was like, look at all this great stuff that Nicole has continued to do, although she's lost. And sometimes candidates just disappear after they lose, because it's hard. We're competitive people. We wouldn't be in this field if we didn't kind of appreciate competition.
Yep.
So he nominated me again to run for president, and only 2 or 3 years had gone by. And I had to talk to my dean again. And he was like, absolutely, but I was busier, excuse me, than the last time I had run for president. And I was his associate dean. So I needed to make sure he was okay with this. And he was like, of course you have to run. We'll figure it out. Just go ahead. And then I talked to my husband, and he said, Nicole, do you really want to put yourself through this? He knew how crushed I was the first time I lost. And he was like, you know, you could lose again. You really want to put yourself through this? And I said, so I love this organization, and I'm always saying how we have to increase diversity within our organization. And every president in the history of ACSM has been white. And here I have another opportunity to change that. And if I don't take it, I don't know when the next opportunity will come, because there are all these processes that you have to go through in order to even be in the position to be nominated. So I said, so I have to run. And he was like, okay, then I'm in full support. And so I ran again, and here I am, I won. So it was great. My long answer to your short question.
So you sort of alluded to this, that you had a lot on your plate. And, you know, a lot of women sort of contemplate these big service roles because there is this feeling that we've got a lot on our plate, because as you mentioned, you know, we're sitting on diversity committees and inclusion committees and all this sort of stuff. And so there's a lot of committee work to be done, but I 100% agree with you. We need that representation in big organizations such as ACSM. So how did you weigh that out? Like, I know you said you love the organization, but then you still got a full plate. So how do you balance it all? And for women who are sort of contemplating whether it's worth it or whether they should go ahead and do it, what do you say to them?
Yeah, so you have to have a support system. You have to have people that you can talk to. And so Katie Schmitz was the president-elect at the time, and she called and asked me if I would run. And Katie and I are also friends. And so we had this conversation about, first of all, just about how she's doing in this role, because she's also a very successful, busy researcher and a mom. And she was in a relationship. She's now married. So, you know, we had this conversation about balance of, you know, your career, your service role in your family life. But I also remember talk to my dean, who's my boss, and my husband, who's my partner, to make sure that they were good with it. Like, they knew if I were to win, what that would mean. And when I won, my dean came into my office, and I was only teaching one class. I had bought out of the rest of them, or my administrative role released me from them. So I was only teaching a class a year. And he said, I think we're going to have to take that last class now. And I said, I don't know how I feel about that. And we had this really great conversation about, you know, my research teams have students on them, and that I'll be teaching students in other ways through my ACSM role, but that I would not have time to have this class, and it wouldn't be fair to the students. So he released me from that class. And so I guess that's my example, but my answer is, you first have to make sure that people are going to be supportive, that your life is going to change a little bit, or a lot in this case. My kids have watched me grow. They've watched me throughout my professional career, and people will ask, well, when's the right time to have kids? And I'm like, yeah, you can't plan for that. There's never going to be a right time. You just have to make it work. And so my kids have had the opportunity to watch me work hard and be successful. I have 3 daughters and a son, and I can be a role model for my kids. I don't hide that it's hard. I don't hide that I'm busy. They understand when I'm working, and they're all adults now. My son's 17, but my daughters are all adults, and they're proud. My youngest daughter is an exercise science major at a different academic institution, and she took her first exercise science class last semester, and the intro to exercise science professor started talking about the American College of Sports Medicine, and she was like, "Mom, I was so proud." And I said, and she said she pulled up the website, and I was hoping that your picture would be there. And I said, "Did you tell anybody?" And she was like, I leaned over to the girl sitting next to me in class and was like, "My mom's the president-elect." And she said, and then I told the professor after class, and she didn't believe me. And we looked, and she wanted to Google you, and she was like so shocked. And so it's really fun that there's no balance. I say work-life integration, but it's that you have to share and have people around you who are going to be supportive.
Yeah, that's key. That support system is key, right? Because like you said, you kind of just have to acknowledge that things are going to change, right? Like it's a big commitment, and so things will change. But as long as everyone in your life, personal and professional life, are comfortable with it, I guess that works, right?
And it's finite. So
Yes.
it's 3 years, president-elect, president, past president. It's finite. So they know 3 years from now, I'll be able to go back and be a regular faculty member again.
Do you have any other sort of messages for women, either early career or mid-career, that you think would be helpful to share?
Sure. So I think it's really important for us to support each other. And I am old enough to remember a time when there was only so much space for women. And so women, I saw it. Women would beat each other down because there was only so much space. And if the woman took the space, if the woman took the position, there wasn't going to be another position for the women. And so it was not supportive. And I also saw this transition where then women who were career-oriented women kind of band together, but then the women who decided that they were going to stay home or pause their career for their family, there was a separation. And now we know and can see there is no separation. Being a woman and a traditional woman who wants to be a wife and a mother and a career-oriented woman, these are all hard things. And we have to support each other. So, whether you're stay-at-home mom or you're working from home, which we all are, most of us are still right now, and you're balancing your family and your career, we have to support each other, and we have to look out for one another. And there's no competition, or there shouldn't be, among women anymore. We really have to help each other. Nobody understands a woman like another woman, and we have to be supportive of that.
Yeah, and it really changes things when you find that group of women where you support each other regardless of what's going on, right? It really changes the way you feel about your position, your research, your teaching, if you have that group of women supporting you, and vice versa, right? It's definitely beneficial in both directions.
Absolutely. And we can be role models. We can be role models for our daughters and our sons and our husbands to see, what is possible. And really, I encourage my son, and I know because he grew up with 3 sisters and me, that I really encourage him to think about the the experiences that women are having and how he can positively impact those experiences by viewing people as people and not just as women. And he's really great. There are things that come out of his mouth that I'm like, I can tell he's my kid.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm so excited that you've taken over this position. I'm so excited to see what happens with ACSM under your helm, and really looking forward to following the rest of your career. I think it's exciting stuff, and some of the papers you talked about today were really interesting. So I'm just looking forward to watching it all. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shilpa. This was a really fun conversation.